that their whole point was they know their stuff is offensive to most people. I mean, they think it's the revealed truth, like a Christian rightist. The revealed truth, the gospel.
But again, I mean, we're not trying to do that. I'm going to take a point of view, which I have been taking on Facebook and some of these emails and on last week's rant and on my oil rant. That's it's a fairly shocking point of view to take. It's a good soundbite if I ever ran for politics. But my point was, what we're trying to do here on the rant, and that recording had been stopped and I just started it again. It's June 16th, 2010. We are not trying to shock. I'm trying to stimulate conversation and determine what message that you're hearing. And the LaRouchePAC.org, that is not what they're doing. I mean, because I would love to talk about the restoration of Glass-Steagall with those guys. In any event, let's move on a little bit.
Well, wait a minute. He's got something. The other thing, and I won't spend a lot of time on this. The interesting thing about LaRouche is he has very pro-socialist, if you will, governmental industrial policies that he thinks the government should have taken over Detroit, so that we had the ability to build our own munitions in the event of war. And he really believes in a big industrial policy. I'm remembering this. It should be directed from Washington. And he's got one of his big things is a coast-to-coast maglev locomotive rail system. Not lying. One of his big bugaboos, or one of his latest.
No, I see one here. LaRouche supports Russian drive for Afghanistan opium eradication. So who knows what nutty stuff he's got. But
he's all over the lot philosophically.
Yeah, he looks like he's all over the map. But it looks like there would be some good discussions to have with him if you can overcome the Obama poster with a Hitler mustache on it and the guy telling me in Alex Jones style that they're going to put us in extermination camps. All of us, because Granny is going to have to go through a death panel. You know, if you've seen the movie Sicko, then you'll see it happens every day. There are procedures that are not done because it's not covered by your plan, even though it would save your life. So people are being put to death now, by definition, under the current system. People that don't have insurance absolutely are not getting heart transplants, unless you go to Seton and they do one of their charitable types of things. So these would be good discussions to have if you didn't seem like a total nut.
Yeah, these guys are acting like total nuts.
So let's get.
There's also, he conflates this anti-Federal Reserve stuff. He's really, he's opposed to this one world government stuff. A lot of it is anti-Zionist. He's got Zionists connected up with all this stuff, Bilderberger conspiracies, and all of that is kind of wrapped into his philosophy. Just for the hell of it.
Gotcha.
Part of it, yeah.
All right, let's move on. Last night, Obama spoke to the nation from the Oval Office regarding the BP. It's called the BP oil spill. It's really BP, Deepwater, Halliburton, probably 4 or 5 other companies that have some responsibility potentially. And I'm going to ask you, viewers, to keep 2 things in mind as we talk about everything, or at least as I talk about everything. Almost on each of these rants, I am hung up on this concept of the commons, okay? And there are certain properties that are not privately owned, and it could be air, land, water. And these properties are used by private individuals and corporations for the production of their goods, or if you're a farmer, or if you're just a homeowner and you're using the water from the lake, you are using the commons. And Garrett Hardin had put it very succinctly where he talked about in the tragedy of the commons. In times of plenty, everybody can use the commons. There's no issue. There's no overpollution of the commons. There's not too much tannery garbage going into the Mianus River for the shoe factories. When we come to times of scarcity, which it appears that we are getting to in most of the commons that we have in this country. And when I call it scarcity, we would call clean air a scarcity. I don't know how many non-attainment areas under the Clean Air Act there are around the country, but most of the large cities are non-attainment. That's when you have to use one of those gas pumps that captures the vapors. Costs more money. We know that in water, we're definitely getting to points of scarcity. With fresh water, not even a question. As far as clean ocean water, it seems with declining populations of fish, for whatever reason, we are running into a time of scarcity with even the salt water. And as far as land goes, it's almost impossible to find a new landfill location without somebody claiming I don't want it in my backyard, NIMBYs.
Well, you have to have trash to energy.
Good idea, depending on how much it takes and how much it spews. Okay?
Well, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, we're burning trash, separated out
I understand.
trash, no plastics, no metal.
I understand there was just some study out about burning wood chips, and it puts out more pollutants than a coal plant. I think the coal industry put that out.
But here's the thing, look, it's another area, little aside, another area where liberals have to choose. Do you want landfills that are big and ugly and conceptually very bad, or would you like to turn some of that household waste, debris, into energy?
Everyone has to choose. You are bringing up the correct point, which will be the second main point. But in any event, as we talk about the commons, and I got some good emails from people this week. My buddy JS, we were talking about education. He's getting a little mixed up as to what we talk about when we talk about the commons, because the questionable items that we call a part of the commons, or at least we are going to always continue to discuss, is the education of the nation, the health of the nation, and the laws between men and women, whatever, between individuals in this country. I add those three things to the idea of what a commons is. But I want you viewers to always be thinking, whenever we're talking about any of these issues, and whenever we're talking about the federal government getting involved in anything, when there is a commons, there is an interest of the government to oversee it in some manner. Otherwise, that will lead you to the tragedy, which is a complete decimation of the commons. Chaos, anarchy. And so, to the extent that we ever have a commons question, we're always wanting to look at the regulations that we see, tax policy, and even political slants that we see. Okay? So throughout this discussion on oil, and who should be responsible for the cleanup, and who has to pay, and who's going to pay the shrimpers, and what happens when they reach the $75 million cap that's written in the 1990 law, which I pulled up, always be thinking, is this a commons? If it is, to what level do we want our government to effectively, and we're going to just talk about effectiveness as though the federal government could actually do it. Okay, the second thing I want you to look at, or always be thinking of, is how do we protect the commons in a way that makes it cheapest to the consumer, both short-term and long-term cost, which of course the long-term cost is sometimes indeterminable. And we need to look at all the costs, public and private. So let's look at that in terms of the oil spill.
Oh, you hired.
Hold on. Let's just hang on a second. We pay right now. We're paying $2.55 to $2.65 a gallon. Talked about this last week. I talked to several of my friends over the past week, and they asked, "What are you going to talk about?" And I go, "Well, Fox has a new message, not a new message, but they have a current message of everything's on fire, everything's broken, Obama's incompetent, the Democrats are incompetent." And that message has permeated down to a lot of people, even people that don't watch Fox. So, for example, the message that I got from my buddy was, Obama's going to be speaking tomorrow. Is it going to interrupt the NBA final Game 6? And he asked the Fox question, which is, why did it take him so long? When you hear that phrase, You've just heard a political phrase out of Fox News, or out of the Republicans, okay? So in any event, we want to try and figure out, whenever we're talking about government regulation or tax policy, what is the way that makes it cheapest to us that own the commons, taxpayers, citizens, legal immigrants, by the way. Legal aliens, I did not bring that up in the immigration rant. I don't mean to say just citizens, but people who are here legally. But in any event, what is the long-term cost of drilling offshore? And how are we going to pay for it? Okay? Now, let me give you the message that was on Sunday's Fox News, because it's great. These guys, I love these guys. How can you not love these guys? They are so good. They are so on point. On first story, it was probably like 8:30 in the morning on Sunday morning, and the commentator was standing there somewhere in Mississippi or Alabama. No, it was in Louisiana, because he goes, "I'm here at ground zero." Now, ground zero has been used as a phrase generally to denote the place where the nuclear weapon went off. That's where it was originally used.
Enola Gay.
The Enola Gay, it's dropping at ground zero in Japan. And then it was used at 9/11 to give us the feeling, we know what the message was there, you should be scared. These guys are attacking us, we don't know why they're attacking us, why don't they love them, why do they hate America? But in any event, the first part of Fox Sunday was ground zero. It was repeated many times throughout the day. They had an Ohio congressman, and he was doing a linkage, which was the failure of Obama to prevent the spill. To prevent the spill. Okay, this is a statute he didn't write, but, you know, you're there, you're responsible at the time that it happens. It's like the failure to protect the borders. The failure to prevent the spill is just like the failure to protect the borders.
Who said that? You or?
It was an Ohio congressman. I can't remember his name. But he was on Sunday, Fox News, Sunday morning.
Ridiculous.
Well, we know what they're doing, okay? We know what the message is. It's the political message.
Saying that George Bush could have prevented Hurricane Katrina. And he should have.
Well,
I mean,
that he should have prevented.
Obama had no more power to see what was going on under a rig than George Bush.
Right. But what I like, again, I'm just pointing
out and then preventing a hurricane.
Okay, I'm just pointing out the message. This is just the message, and then we'll discuss some of the issues. But the message is, he's failed to protect our borders, just like he failed to prevent this spill, and he failed to clean this up. And the third thing that we see is, like today, it's day 58. Okay? They've got a little ticker at the bottom of Fox. CNN has it too. Day 58. Do you know when those days started, by the way? Wilcox, can you remember early on, can you remember 20, 30 years ago when they were counting off the days?
The hostage crisis.
The hostage crisis. The failure of Jimmy Carter to solve the hostage crisis. Now, Sean Hannity has been really good about linking Carter with Obama and talking about how bad Carter was and Obama. But they are doing exactly the same thing. Look at the number of days. It took him 57 days before he would speak from the Oval Office. It took him 52 days before he came down here the fourth time. I'm just pointing out the message. And again, of course, this is a 24-hour news cycle, entertainment. This is obviously a very, very interesting type of calamity because it continues. And you've got this camera showing the spewage. It continues. Goes on and on and on and on and on. It's not like a Katrina problem that after a week, they got everybody off the roofs, and the problem went away.
The water's gone, and seemingly it looks like it's all done.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing was the Coast Guard had sent a letter, I guess, on Sunday or Saturday, which, by the way, under the statute, there is a failure to comply with a federal removal order can result in civil penalties of up to $25,000 for each day of violation. So I believe that Coast Guard order was a removal order so that they could get the clock ticking on that thing. But the message on Sunday was, why did Obama wait so long? Why did the Coast Guard wait so long to send this letter? And this message is interesting. And hang on just a second, Wilcox. I just want to get to one more point, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
When I was in contract law, one of the things that we learned was that when you sign a contract with somebody, there's going to be damages if you decide to breach that contract. The damages may be specified, they may be in a statute, or they may be by law, by case law. And that there was no blame if you breached the contract. In other words, it was not morally wrong to breach the contract. You pay the price. You paid the damages. And what you're seeing here is that you're seeing kind of a hate thing happening towards BP. And that's really a bit bothersome to me, because all that BP has done is try and make as much money as possible under the regulations and the permits that have been issued. And by the way, the Act, the 1990 Act, the Oil Pollution Act overview, this thing actually allows the states to have even harsher permitting processes and laws and penalties than the federal government. But they're more worried about the jobs. Okay? Now, what you're seeing is this blame, and they're turning it into a moral issue. And it is not a moral issue. It's a moral issue because Republicans want to get elected in the fall. So the Republicans want this crisis to absolutely not be cured in mid-August, because they're going to just point to that camera and show that oil spewing on every campaign ad, going, whoever's I'm running against is responsible for this. And people need to not think of this as a moral issue. It is not a moral issue. It is a breach of contract. It is a breach of the lease. It is a contingent, an item, a condition under the lease that they may have breached. Now they owe more money to the federal government for cleanup. Under the regulations, they owe more money per day, per gallon. They owe certain amounts of damages.
Yeah, I agree with that. You can't call it a moral. It's not a moral issue.
Well, people are enraged, okay? And they're enraged over, they don't know. It's just ugly. It's an ugly thing. They're showing ugly pictures. It's a terrible, terrible calamity. But people are enraged at it.
Well, so you get to this issue of, remember, what's pointed out in an article I'm actually looking at is, they're going to, you got people who are going to sit there on the left who are going to blame this thing on free markets, when free markets don't enter into the whole thing, because the Minerals Management Service, enters into, leases that common, if you will, to BP. And it's really, you're entrusting that service, part of the Interior Department, the Department of the Interior, to oversee these things, these offshore drilling sites and land. How or why the federal government really owns all this land is kind of an interesting concept in and of itself. But anyway.
But they are supposedly, and you bring up an extremely good point, because you were talking about the Wall Street Journal article. What was the phrase?
Oh, where you have regulators, where we have regulatory breakdown, as we had with Moody's and S&P overlooking the mortgage-backed securities crisis and other crises. It's called cognitive capture.
There it is. Okay, this is when the Minerals Management Service employees are sitting in a room negotiating the lease with BP, or pick anybody, Exxon, and you're just sitting there messing around and talking over provisions, and it's a little break, and the gentlemen from Exxon say to you, what are you going to do when you leave government service? And they go, and they wink. And the guy from the Minerals Management Service says, I don't know what I'm going to do after I get out of here. And he goes, wink, wink, nod, nod. We know damn well what he's going to do when he gets out of there. You still there?
Yep, I'm here.
He's going to get a job. He's going to revolve that door, and he's going to get a job lobbying for those guys or negotiating those leases. Now, I want to bring up a very, very important point about the Commons at this point. And that is that in the event, and we do only have, it appears, a two-party system in this country, and one of those parties supports people that use the Commons, we have a structural breakdown in that political appointments are made when that particular party gets into office. And those political appointments and appointees will then allow for a decimation of the Commons. I'm just saying what I've seen. Now, that doesn't mean that the other party has not done the same thing as well, because this was going on in the 90s under Clinton. And there is a disconnect. There needs to be a disconnect.
Well, it isn't always the intent of a regulator, despite the fact that you get people becoming, incapable of thinking in terms other than that of the industry.
Well, then you don't know about the Texas TCEQ, which is Perry appointees, and those guys, we're about to be taken over by the EPA, all permits.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, they have absolutely not done their duty to the Commons. And what I'm pointing out is that there is a structural deficiency in our regulatory system that when a political actor gets on the stage and has the ability to appoint people to these overseeing, to these regulatory boards and commissions, you can't then later on complain that there's an oil spill. So, for example, if you're a Republican and you voted for George Bush and he didn't change these particular laws on the caps, how do you actually say, I don't like the oil spill? And how do you blame Obama and his administration without going back and blaming everybody? I mean, the 1990 law was passed in response to the Valdez to come up with a level of damages. It capped damages, $75 million per spill plus removal costs.
Well,
Okay? Plus removal costs, all right? So, I just wanted to bring up that there's that particular problem that we've got under most of our regulatory systems that what did you say the phrase is again? I'm sorry, the cognitive...
It's called cognitive capture.
Cognitive capture, where the regulators are captured by industry.
Yeah.
There is no question that's what happened in the MMS.
Well,
Okay?
it's when the regulators identify with them more than the public they're supposed to serve and protect.
Right, so it appears that we've got a structural problem with our overseers with regard to our Commons. We have
the argument, by the way, that was leveled at the SEC, and then, Moody's and S&P and everyone else. The SEC obviously has some oversight over the other guys because they're independent contractors.
Well, it seems like this leads to anybody that ever says they're going to self-regulate, to the extent that they are using a Commons or have an effect on a Commons, and we again always have to agree on what that Commons is, then you can't self-regulate because your interest in your industry is to make as much money as possible. We want you to do that. That allows us to have these computers and these phones and all these things that we have to talk. And it's a nice pantry behind me. Can't self-regulate. And we certainly know that the regulations and the caps were negotiated.
Yeah.
They didn't, why did they even set caps? Why would there be caps set? Why isn't there a cost of living adjustment? We know
It's a
what.
bad deal. In other words, if you were an attorney acting for somebody, you'd be sued for dereliction of duty if you didn't include those things in a contract.
Oh, exactly. And again, we have agreed in the past that the big battle, the fight, is always between the free market and the commons.
Yeah.
That's always happening. But in order for that to actually come up with some type of equilibrium that may prevent a spill in the future, let's say,
Yeah.
or clean up a spill in the future better, is that somebody has to represent the commons. They actually have to represent them zealously, the way a lawyer does in court. That is a structural defect in our system, whether it's Democrats or Republicans in power. Now, the good thing about this issue, and that we've seen, and that spewing oil coming up out of that pipe at whatever number of barrels, if it's the Obama administration, they say barrels. If it's the Republicans, they're saying gallons because the number's much bigger. It's 55 gallons per barrel.
Yep.
Is that, and this is a point that I brought up yesterday to some of my friends, and that was, why is the public not in an incredible uproar over coal dust and excrement from coal plants, and sulfur dioxide, acid rain, asthma, lung problems, lung cancer, mercury poisoning? We never hear anything about that. And why aren't we hearing anything about it right now? You know why? Because you don't see it. You don't see it. But it's there. There's more kids than ever that have asthma. It may be one of the causes, I don't know. But remember our two questions here. What is the commons? And how do we protect the commons in a way that makes it cheapest to the consumer, both short and long term? Well, when we're discussing the oil spill, and I'm not trying to link climate change legislation the way Fox is doing a diversion. Obama was trying to link, he wants some new energy to climate change legislation. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when we discuss these issues, and we're discussing the spill and how ugly it is and what it's doing to the wetlands in Louisiana and Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida, why are we not talking about also what the coal plants are doing to this country? And I'm just picking coal just because they're easy. Why are we ranting and raving that Obama took 54 days? Well, I'll tell you what's more disgusting to me is why
Obama doesn't like the coal plants, and he doesn't think that the scrubbers are sufficient that they've been mandated to put in.
Well, we know they're not. We do know they're not in Texas.
So, I don't know.
We know this in Texas. Okay, we do know this in Texas. Now, maybe you've got the cleanest coal plants ever up there in Connecticut.
No, the big coal plants are starting in Pennsylvania and heading due west is where a lot of the big coal generation is. There's a little plant here, but we have nuclear up here. We've got 3 nuclear reactors up on the Housatonic River.
I got you. Well, here's a good way to maybe look at this, because it would be something that we couldn't see. What if this was actually nuclear fallout that was moving in this way up the coast? How would that change the discussion?
Well, one's solvable and one isn't. One
No.
is a dissolvable, solvable, naturally occurring substance that isn't,
Oh, you're talking about oil.
oil.
Well, I mean, the Valdez, they dig down underneath the rocks and the dirt up in Alaska.
That's the way of looking at oil is, if you want to be
Okay.
very scientific about it, Michael Crichton would probably, God rest his soul, is the kind of guy who would bring sobriety to a discussion like this and say, well, look, at least it isn't nuclear, and at least it's something that will solve itself because it's an organic substance on our planet.
Well,
Will not ruin, will not kill, it may smother, and it may kill fish in the short term, and birds in the short term, and other wildlife, grasses, marshlands, and things.
well, let's look at it this
But
way.
it is solvable, so
Hang on. In torts, okay, when I took torts,
yeah.
they did something called the Socratic method, which you would come up with an example, an extreme example on one side, that you can pretty much get everybody in the classroom nodding at. And then you'd come up with an extreme example on the other side. And you get everybody nodding at that. And then you'd work your way towards the middle to determine what would be a possible solution, or what would be the regulatory system. So let's just look at, for a minute, what if this were nuclear fallout from a plant, one of those 3 plants that you mentioned in Connecticut? What would people be screaming? And who would they be blaming? And what should be done in the future? And these questions I really do want to answer. Okay, so what would people be saying? They would be telling the federal government, get me out of here, buy my property, stop this leakage. I want free health care for this, okay? I want to be tested for radioactive fallout. Stop this, whatever it takes. We want you to do that. Well, again, these nuclear power plants have signed contracts. They've gone through regulatory procedures. They have permits. The question would be, which I posed to my friends, which I never got to earlier in this broadcast, was, are you willing to pay an extra $20 or $30 a month in electricity costs to put another containment barrier over that nuclear facility? When I talked to my friends, I got a universal, because I said, are you willing to pay $3.50 a gallon tomorrow, starting tomorrow, so that we will never have a spill like this again? In other words, if we put in legislation, say, where you have to drill 2 wells, a reliever well, like other countries do when you drill offshore, or that we have to go ahead and beef up the Coast Guard to also be the oil crisis guard, and they have booms, and they have the Kevin Costner machines, and they have the absorbent stuff. And I asked my friend, would you be willing to pay an extra $1 a gallon? And he said no. And I said, similarly for coal, are you willing to pay an extra $20 or $30 a month to make sure that you get the best scrubbers on those coal plants? And he said, no, I can't afford it. My point is that that analysis is never done by the average American. Never. Never done.
Well, they should, you know. But then again, we get into an argument about, well, I'm giving my federal government enough already, and they should be doing this anyway. And what you're asking me to do is pay an extra tax for something.
Well, when you say federal government, again, it's BP and et al., you know, all of the people that are involved in the drilling. All they're doing, so in other words, what you're saying is that we expect the federal government to be taking care of spills?
No, we expect them to be putting regulations in place that would, in the eventuality of something like this, first of all, there'd be regulations in place that these guys did something wrong, and they admittedly, or it's come out.
Well, I mean, they may or may not have violated the terms of their permit and the things that they were supposed to do, and maybe their own self-certification. Correct. So they breached a lease.
They didn't have some safety consideration in place that they should have, came out early. So they were doing something low cost. They were saving themselves some money.
Right, which we want them to do.
But that's not what you want done.
But wait, we want the companies to try and make as much money as they possibly can. We need them to do that. It's our duty to impose regulations upon them that make our long-term cost. So when BP files for bankruptcy, or BP America files for bankruptcy, and we're left holding the bag for the cleanup, in the long term, we, the taxpayer, are already responsible for this cleanup. There is no way that BP is going to pay for all the cleanup. It's not going to happen. They're not going to do it. They'll file for bankruptcy. And they'll do like a Johns Manville with the asbestos claims. They'll set up a trust fund. It'll be limited. Somebody else will buy the assets. They won't buy the spewing well until it's capped. Then they'll buy it. and then the liabilities will be limited, and then we'll have the American taxpayer or the state taxpayers of the Gulf oil states cleaning that up. Taxpayers inevitably responsible.
Yeah, well, they put Corning and a bunch of people, PPG and others, they put them right out of business.
That's right.
It went overboard. I'll tell you, in asbestos litigation, those lawyers butchered those companies. That stuff was probably, that became abusive. I mean, you talk about a tipping, things going from one side and then tipping way out of balance on the other. It destroyed industry.
The nature of it is, to the extent that you allow an industry to tell you, for example, that sucralose is okay, all right? Sucralose is NutraSweet, all right? Yeah. Or, no, it's not. But sucralose is the new NutraSweet.
But the old NutraSweet, we had a problem.
Well, or we had a problem with saccharin, or we had a problem with sugar.
Yeah.
Okay? They tell us it's okay. There are potential unknown claims out there later on because you haven't had this stuff out there for 10 or 20 years with people using it every day in coffee.
Your FDA approved of it.
And then you're sitting here after the fact, okay? You're sitting here after the fact, and the fact is going to be, under our current system of Obamacare, we, the taxpayers, are again going to be responsible for the mesothelioma claims, to the extent that there's nothing left in the trust fund. You see those claims, that the commercials for that, for the asbestos-related claims. We, the taxpayer, are inevitably responsible for the damages that are done to the commons. In that case, it's to the health of a segment of the population. They're going to come into the pool. They're going to be in the pool of health care.
Because the federal government allowed this stuff to be mined, or...
Well, they didn't know.
Never in the first place.
They didn't know. I mean, look, we're mining. What about black lung disease? Okay? Black lung disease continues to happen. OSHA attempts to put certain ventilators that you have to have in there.
You're going to wear a ventilator. You're
Right.
a miner.
Right. And so, over time, they have determined that there are certain kinds of diseases that are coming out of that dust, and they've attempted to regulate for it. My point...
But there's a solution to that. It's called open. You got to go to strip mining, baby.
Take it easy.
Don't have people running around down
Take
the
it
rainbow.
easy. Take it easy. And then when the fresh water gets clogged up, okay, because they can just bulldoze that stuff down the mountains. Hold on.
Tailings completely.
Water, again, we do need the water, which is a commons, protected. We need the air, which is a commons, protected. In this case, the ocean and the shoreline is a commons. We need it protected. What I do want to say is that I feel that the taxpayer should pick up the tab. Here is your soundbite if you're going to run against me in office. I feel the taxpayer is responsible for the cleanup costs.
Well, yeah, that's
You will be anyway.
The federal government.
Yeah, that's right, but I want it to be more biting than that. People detach themselves from the federal government. You're not detached. You're the taxpayer.
Well, when only 40, and by the way, the taxpayer is a minority.
I understand that, but to the extent that you are in a party that is pro-drill baby drill, I don't want to hear any crap out of you.
Out of me.
Drill baby drill, here it is. Here's the ultimate thing of drill baby drill without sufficient regulation, or, as they claim in the free market, without consumers being willing to pay enough to come up with the protections that they claim they need.
Well, conservatives would say to you, big C conservatives would say, how much moral hazard do you want to, or hazard, natural hazard, do you want to insure against? You already have a federal government that does all, hey, how about your Department of Energy budget? You'd think that this would fall under the purview of the Department of Energy. How big is that budget? $25 billion?
Giant.
It's a big budget. You'd hope that the money that the taxpayer is throwing at the Department of, of Energy would take care of things like this.
You would hope.
What the hell are those guys doing over there? They're not. They could call it a failure of an existing department. And again,
No, and that's a good point.
They pointed Obama. You can't point at Obama for this. You might say, okay, well maybe you should have called in the military. You should have called in the Navy, given them 3 days, and said if you can't get under control, we're bringing in the Navy.
Well, you bring up a very good point. That it talks, in talking about this, we've been running under the assumption that the federal government can regulate it effectively. Now, this is a separate argument. To the extent that they can't effectively regulate it, capital C conservatives would absolutely agree. You might as well not have any regulation at all, except for allowing lawsuits without caps. Because in the event that the federal government cannot legislate or regulate or inspect or do anything except try and get a job in the people that they're overseeing, then potentially there should be no regulation. That's a separate argument.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying.
No, and it's a good one. It's a good one because
I'm just sticking to the gut. You know, you already got all this money being spent. Obviously, the money we say allocate your resources better and protect the people, because nobody except the most wild-eyed, libertarian who wants no government, sits here and says there's no place for government in stepping into commerce anywhere where there's an abuse or a potential for abuse.
well, it may be that you get into a hybrid system, more hybrid than we have right now, where if you could designate funds like this, and they tried it in Texas with the lottery was supposed to go to education, okay? And they throw it into the general fund. But potentially, the way to do it would be, if we were talking about paying an extra $1 a gallon, and that $1 a gallon goes specifically for the federal government to hire a contractor or get the Navy out there to be inspecting all of the blowout preventers weekly.
Yeah.
Okay? If you could actually show that that dollar that you're paying goes directly for a specific regulatory purpose, then you've now potentially gotten to the point where we've got a little bit more of an effective regulatory system. But the idea of self-certification, are you kidding me? The oil chiefs, this was on 616, it was in 616, these guys were, Exxon and some other guys went up and were testifying in front of Congress, and they go, we can handle a blowout that's beyond even what just happened. Well, why aren't you sending your... I can't even believe they're allowed to say this. Aren't these guys under oath? We know they can't. But that's the system of self-regulation that we have right now.
And let's see it done now.
Then go do it. Here, he said, and in one hand he says, the executives tried to distance themselves from BP even as lawmakers said their own drilling plans and spill response blueprints were virtually identical to the ones used by BP. And the executives conceded that the industry was not well equipped to deal with a major blowout a mile underwater, and that the emphasis in well drilling must be on preventing such a disastrous accident in the first place. And these guys are saying, and on the one hand, on their permit applications, we can handle any calamity that will happen, and the other, they say they can't do it.
Yeah.
And this is the idea of self-regulation, or MMS, overseeing this. The point is, the taxpayer should pay. And if the taxpayer should pay, then the taxpayer might actually look at what's happening up there and say, we've got to drill, baby, drill. Well, if you want to drill, baby, drill, and Obama can't do this, he doesn't have the political will, he's only in his first term. He goes, we're going to charge you $1 tax per gallon. And we're going to use it, it's going to go into this fund, it's going to be for inspections, it's going to be for inspections of the equipment as it's being produced, okay? You know, the steel. We're going to inspect this, and we're going to have a contingency plan ready to go. Do we have a contingency plan ready to go for one of your nuclear reactors that goes out? No. You know why?
They're better prepared because that's been on such high alert for so long.
Yeah, but the idea of potentially evacuating New York City for Indian River, or I can't even imagine. They are not prepared for it. Nobody's prepared for it. The question is, nobody's willing, or the statement that you hear is that nobody's willing to pay any more money for anything to prevent these type of calamities that result from self-regulation or the regulated lobbying and writing the regulations.
Yeah, because the American taxpayer is tapped out.
They claim to be tapped out.
They're all tapped out. You're tapped out.
You're always tapped out, though. There was never a time that you thought you were making enough money and you wanted taxes to go up.
Hey, someone's got you in a Kimura? What do?
You tap.
You tap out.
You tap out.
Federal government, your state government, and your federal government have you in a Kimura. There's nothing you can do about it. So they throw a fake Kimura and get you in a chokehold.
Here's another example from environmental law, that when they were coming up with the definition of hazardous materials and hazardous substances, oil and gas are not included in those. They're specifically excluded from the act that comes up with the definition and then the things that will have to happen under a Superfund Act claim.
Well, and, hey.
This again brings up our problem with lobbying and the ability of lobbyists to spend as much soft money on these campaigns. And again, do you think that we're going to be able to raise these caps? I mean, Obama was calling for, his administration was calling for doing a retroactive law against BP. And I saw one of the White House lawyers said that he didn't think it was unconstitutional. Well, it is. And if it isn't unconstitutional, it's stupid.
Retroactive.
Retroactive. We need consistency for the free market to work. Consistency in regulation. Now, if you've already got your coal plant being built and you've got a permit, I can understand your complaint if they said, now we need you to put in scrubbers and it's going to cost you an extra $1 billion. I understand that. That will not lead to people building coal plants if halfway through the federal government can tell you, you now have to do this. And what they did under the Clean Air Act was set up a threshold, a percentage of upgrade that you would do that would trigger the new provisions. So if you're doing, I don't remember what the number was back in whatever year it was I was in law school, but if you hit a 20% cost of the plant is being upgraded, then you now have to comply and you would have to then install the scrubbers.
Yeah.
And that seemed like a fair way. Now the TCEQ in Texas has never made anybody do that. And I say never, some people will come up with examples. But
it's been pretty hands-off.
But we don't want him going back, changing the law, testing it in the Supreme Court, and who knows which way those guys are going to go. The Roberts Court, who knows? Seriously. I have no idea.
No, you have no idea.
You don't know what's going to happen there. So, but for the industry, they want to drill. I want them to drill. I want to get the oil out of the ground, by the way. I want all the spills to happen now. I'd like to burn all of the oil right now. Burn it all. Just get it gone. Go up to the Arctic, drill it, go off the Florida coast. I'll tell you what, Florida doesn't have many rigs around it, all right, because they have set up more stringent regulations. And let's drill that too.
Well,
and let me tell you, they'll come up with a plan.
By the way, that showed George Bush's utter hypocrisy to get elected down in Florida, even though his brother had to be against offshore rigs in Florida.
Well, most people enjoy the beaches there, whereas in Alabama...
They're 12 and a half miles. You get them well off so you can't see them by eye line.
Right.
Eyesight. Line of sight is 12 and a half miles. Curvature of the earth, boom. Can't see them. So George Bush then starts to propose, George Bush Jr., a.k.a. Monkey Boy, he starts to talk about how we need much more drilling, yet he wouldn't push for more in the Gulf and off Florida. So it was really poor. Just like we say, he refused to seal the borders.
It's political.
Politically. All for political reasons because he thought he'd suffer.
Clearly. So
he wouldn't get, and mean, that's the worst. That's the most stupid calculation on his side of the aisle he could possibly have made. And Karl Rove is an idiot for giving him that advice. Anyway.
Well, but in any event, I mean, it is another example of the disconnect, the problem that we have of unlimited campaign funding under Citizens United, okay, lobbyists writing the regulations, the revolving door of both legislators and regulators into the companies that they regulated, and really the only couple of solutions so far, which is a 10-year revolving door. Once you leave government service, it's going to be 10 years before you lobby. We need legislation to overturn Citizens United. We can't have corporations spending unlimited sums. The result is it's too ugly to even contemplate. And term limits.
Oh, you know it.
And term limits. Our buddy, who, remember from the old country, our buddy was saying that the one thing that the Tea Party could potentially do right now that makes some sense, since the one unifying force is throw the bums out, even though generally they're saying throw the Democratic bums out. If you can get enough of these newbies up there, you could actually potentially start a constitutional amendment for term limits for senators and representatives.
Yeah.
You could do it. I thought that was a great idea. I thought that's a great idea.
Yeah, if you could get enough people out, you'd be fine.
Well, and the point is, if you're throwing the bums out, the current ones that come in, if they really are running under a Tea Party thing, if they recognize that the defect is that once you become entrenched, you become beholden, and you know you're going to work for those guys, you're going to sit on the board of directors when you retire,
That's right.
then you're going to end up with more gigantic oil spills paid for by the taxpayer.
Yeah, but
Nuclear
yeah,
spills,
right. But
chemical
remember,
spills.
the other thing we've discussed is the lobbyist, besides trying to lessen regulations, also wants to seek economic advantage for the company for which he lobbies.
Right.
And what that is an economic function. What that is an interference in market.
Yes, it's by definition it's an interference in market
What you're trying to do is crowd out competitors. Typically what they try to do is crowd out competitors.
that don't have as much money. And again, I am not putting a moral judgment on them doing that, as long as they're doing it legally.
No, I know, but the point is, that's why lobbying could be found against. You talked about free speech. I said, look, there's a general welfare clause that's been used and abused, by the way, for all kinds of reasons by the Supreme Court. But I think you'd have just as good a chance fighting lobbying because it does economic damages to consumers, American citizen consumers.
Well, it damages the market irreparably due to the volumes of money that the lobbyists can spend legally under Citizens United.
Well, whatever, you're damaging a market. You're damaging a market,
Well, and I can't compete.
and you can certainly find in the Constitution within you or the right to combat that.
Well, and I can't compete. And if I'm the one that has to stand up for the commons, it's broken. It's broken. That system is broken. That can't continue because there's no way for me to compete against Exxon. They can buy 33 senators with $330 million every 2 years. I can't compete with that. I can give them $100, $1,000, whatever the limitation is as an individual. It's broken.
Well, there's an interesting question here. You talked about the commons and who owns the commons. Well, you say we own the commons. Good question. By what system of laws or thought does the average man own the commons? I mean, does this fall under the rubric of natural law? What does it fall under?
No, there are actual properties that are within the boundary of, let's look at land. There are properties that are within the internationally respected lines of our borders, okay? Or there's a certain number of miles off that they've decided either at the UN or under international law. This certain number of miles off you own. Well, then the federal government does not say that's private property that can be bought. So it starts out as a public property. But for example, you can buy parkland when they sell it. It happens.
Sure, yeah,
It happens
yeah.
in Texas. Let me just tell you, it happens in Texas a lot. It happens in tollways. It
Well, that's
happens.
right. They start selling toll roads to private contractors for a present value sum, as has been discussed down there in Texas, or has been done in states like Texas. That's a crime.
Well, we were getting ready to sell the certain mountains in West Texas, and there was a huge uproar over it, and they're like, we can't afford to take care of it, and, you know, it was like a closed bidding process, and, you know, there were not a lot of bidders, et cetera, and they ended up pulling it back from the brink. But this is the same, it was I believe it was the land commissioner. But it's another case of when you are representing the commons, you cannot be politically motivated or economically motivated. You can't be. You have to protect the commons at all costs.
Yeah, so when you're overseeing it, you got to be, well, what you're talking about is somebody got to have dreadlocks and wear Birkenstocks working in that department.
If that's necessary, sure, that's fine. It just can't be a political operative that came out of the oil industry when we're talking about an oil spill, and then end up whining about it and having everybody in the country whining about this cleanup. This is the worst thing ever. In any event, I just wanted everybody, Wilcox, I appreciate it. We just, we're going to continue talking about the definition of the commons throughout these rants, and the regulation of the commons and the tax policy of the commons, which we haven't even talked about, oil depletion allowances, things that are given to oil companies, ability to move profits offshore, not pay taxes for them. And then how do we protect the commons in a way that makes it cheapest to the consumer in the long term, including health costs, including damage to water, including damage to birds, including damage to the ecosystem, actual economic damage to it. We always have to look at that. There are long-term effects and consequences to all of these regulations. And these calamities happen. I understand everybody's trying to put food on their table, put more McDonald's on their table for their kids. And as long as they can do that, they don't really care about these issues. But you see oil spewing out like that, and now people are in an uproar. Well, you know what? Shut up. Shut up. You elected these bums. I'm telling you about the other calamities. Coal plants in Texas. You continue to elect Perry, and you're complaining about oil spills? You're complaining about your kid having asthma?
I think McDonald's is responsible for those fat asthmatic children more than the coal plant.
Well, that's probably true. In any event, I'd like to thank a couple of our sponsors. We've got pianobyangelo.com for all of your keyboard and musical party needs here in Austin, Texas. TicoAdventureLodge.com. That's down in Samara, Costa Rica. Great little motel. AustinAreaPlumbing.com for all your plumbing needs. And ZetaDesign.com, decorative painting. Nobody agrees specifically with my opinions. They agree with us having discussions about these items. So don't blame them for something that you might disagree with me about. Appreciate it, Wilcox.
Yep.
Y'all have a great day. God bless.
Roger.